why do you think they can actually manage a PPP process? So if you have capacity constraints in managing your own finances, it's not clear that you have the capacity to actually manage very complex contractual and politically difficult relations in a PPP process. Anyway, so there are constraints, but again, don't forget about it as a potential, and in the end, probably one needs to keep at it. Now, last and least, and I'm almost at the end, is last and perhaps least, is external resources, aid. Turns out not only do we not have good data on urban financing patterns in general around the world, we also, turns out, we don't have very good data on what's needed in terms of aid and even what is provided in terms of aid. We did pull together, and I won't get into details here, some data, Homi Karas and I, on what is actually provided. Turns out India is the fourth largest recipient in terms of urban aid, according to our estimate. The World Bank, by far the largest provider of urban aid among the OECD donors. But that's about all almost one can say. In terms of amounts, it's been relatively steady and a very small, to some extent declining share of overall aid. Now, we looked at rather carefully at what do donors say that they want to do in the urban areas. We found a number of interesting strategies that are actually very good analytical pieces on the urban problem, the metro, to some extent the metropolitan problems, and some very good strategies of what aid donors want to do about it. If you read the urban strategy of the World Bank, I think you will have very little to disagree with. The intentions are great, the strategies are very sound. The trouble is there's a big gap between intentions and strategies and actual delivery. So there's, first of all, a lack of resources that have not gone up, if anything, have gone down, despite the fact that the strategies call for increased resources, aid resources to flow into urban areas. And indeed, many of the aid institutions don't have a strong capacity in terms of dealing with urban issues. There's very little attention in practice to the urban and metro finance issues. There's attention to other urban issues where there are urban programs and projects, but actually the finance issues are often neglected. There's insufficient, and it's related to the finance issue, because if you don't focus on the finance issues, very likely projects and programs are not going to be sustainable and not scalable. Indeed, that's been exactly the evidence coming out of evaluations of urban programs. They're not sustainable, they have not been focused on scalability, and often it is because they have not focused on financial sustainability and capacity of the urban areas. And finally, of course, lack of attention to systematic data collection on cities and urban aid that Roy talked about earlier. So what's the way forward? And I think this is my last slide. Well, to my mind, we all have to keep at it. We have to, at the country level, at the city level, we have to do the best we can in terms of good pragmatic analysis, good advice, and good examples. We have to focus on the financial capacity of metros, which we often do not in actual program design delivery. We have to understand national and local institutions, and very importantly, politics. If we don't understand the politics, chances are and the institutional setup, chances are whatever good intentions we have and whatever good advice we provide will actually be beside the mark. And we need to look for opportunities of change. You need to look for opportunities of change in India wherever they arise. For example, Delhi subway would have been a great opportunity, perhaps. Then we all need to, I think, push ultimately, I believe, for self-financing metros, and I think the advice here would be obvious. I won't even run through it. And perhaps we now need to think, when we think finance, let's think about links to other urban policy areas that could be drivers for change in the financing areas. So, land use and infrastructure planning came up this morning, I think is an important area to not just look in isolation, but actually link to finance. And the fact that this is sometimes done now here in India, I think is a very good sign. And the more we could link finance, land use and infrastructure planning, and our PK, his book, just what little I saw, I think is absolutely right on this. The link between green cities and climate change and financing I think is an important and potentially promising one, because if we also heard this morning, if you want to have polluters pay, if you want to have those who cause the damage, those who need to deal with the adaptation challenges, you can only do it if you develop the financial tools to underwrite it, incentive structures. So let's use that mechanism to perhaps more generally call attention to best and good practice on the financing side. And finally, every city today has to think about how am I going to be competitive in the global marketplace as a city, every city government. And if you are poorly administered, poorly managed, poorly financed, you're not going to be competitive. So perhaps this angle of competitiveness can now help us drive administrators at the metro level, at the state level, and at the national level to, and maybe your new government, whoever it's going to be, wanting to be competitive in the international marketplace. If you can push them from the competitive perspective, may give you a chance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Linn. And I think he gave us, one message he said is there's no silver bullet, but there are options. The own resources and the external resources of PPP. But unless we improve our own resources, we are not going to get PPP or external borrowing. I think that message was very clearly. But when he was going through, I like those last 2 points. Keep it up and making competitive cities. And in Hindi, we say, lage raho munna bhai. All of us sitting here, we are constantly keeping it up in spite of all the problems. We keep trying and trying. And whatever little is happening is because of all the efforts which people do at the local level. Now I'm very pleased to invite my friend, Dr. Barjor Mehta. He's lead urban specialist with the World Bank.
Full disclosure, I'm not doctor. I never got the time to finish my PhD and never thought about it. But I went straight into doing some work. And thank you. And I'm in the company of 2 people whom I've read about but never met, even though I worked for the World Bank. But it's great to be here. It's funny, 30 years ago I began working, my first job was in a metropolitan area, that's Mumbai. And I worked in the slums of Thane and Kalyan. And we were doing the development management system under a World Bank finance project, at least knowing I would end up working for the bank. And my job was to design a development management system for Thane and Kalyan. And we did a lot of work. It was a fascinating piece of work and a great education to begin. Any young person who wants to begin their career should go to Bombay. I mean, I think, I'm not from Bombay, but I would agree with you, because that's the best learning place you can ever, a learning area that you could ever get. Now, the one big lesson out of my Bombay work was the fact that there was no metropolitan government. So this book that we have, Financing Metropolitan Governments, I think in India we do not have a metropolitan government. I don't know of any such government in India. And so in the absence of such a government, what we do have are arrangements which do bits and pieces of the work that a government would do. And the development authorities are essentially planning authorities. Now, if you take from the book the Sao Paulo experience, where you do have 39 local governments, municipalities, with a government, but which is a shell. Now, I subsequently, just before moving to India, I had the pleasure of working in the ports in the coastal city of Dar es Salaam, which is about 5 million people, roughly counted. And it used to have, in the 60s, 3 independent local governments, and they couldn't talk to each other, and they collapsed in the 80s and early 90s. They had a financial control board, and because under law, one of them was called Dar es Salaam Municipal Council, the other one was called Temeke, and the other one was called Kinandoni. They actually out of the blue, they created a metropolitan government because they couldn't dissolve a government that had been created. And so they got the Dar es Salaam Municipal Council, under which they had the Ilala Municipal Authority, the Kinondoni Municipal Authority, and the Temeke Municipal Authority. And elected members of these three would then select councillors to go to the metropolitan government, and they amongst themselves would have a Dar es Salaam Dar es Salaam mayor. Guess what? None of the three, even after having elected this, wanted to have anything to do with the metropolitan government. And here I was from the World Bank, having read all that you had written, and I thought, here is a place where we will have a Dar es Salaam Metropolitan Development Program. I worked very hard at it. We never managed it. So now what we have are three standalone investment programs coordinated at through a unit which is somehow sits in the Dar es Salaam Municipal Council, but only in name. But essentially takes the fund flows and directs it into the three jurisdictions. Now that, to me, and then we found the similar issue in the neighboring country of Uganda, where you have Kampala, which was a large municipal authority, and then it enlarged its jurisdictions, and they created a metropolitan government. It's too early to tell whether that works or not. But what I was very interested in, I would really recommend to you, is to read the chapter on China. It's a very enlightening chapter. I found it extremely educating. It sort of gives you a realistic view about what is happening in China. And some of the things that really struck me and which would be very useful to us in India is there are some words in there which really make a lot of sense, is that because of their history, the way the arrangements work were adaptive experimentation and local improvisation. Now, these are two terms that in India these things don't exist in India. I don't like this word, but we do jugaad. Yeah, I actually hate that word because it doesn't make any sense. You know, it actually means that we are lowering our quality bar. But essentially, in a place like India, this is where we must learn from, of where is it that we would be able to do adaptive experimentation. And I work for the World Bank, so I can't say that we are given to experimentation in a very big way. We are ourselves, I must admit, a fairly rigid organization. And so experimentation under our umbrella is a little difficult to do, but not impossible. The other idea that I thought was very, very useful was in subsequent chapter is that the question about linking infrastructure investment with growth activities. I think that's very important. That's another issue that we don't do in this country. We have no way of linking the investment in prioritizations to growth activities. We basically would have a transport plan, which is essentially a mobility plan, but it doesn't really fix with the land use plan, and it doesn't fix with the economic activities of the city. And therefore, we have investments, yes, but we do not really have a linkage between investments and growth. And I think going forward in a metropolitan arrangement of experimentation in some places in India, this is where it would be good to go to. And in the chapter on slums, I think Meela, who was my boss at one time, my first boss in the World Bank, I think she comes up with a very good statement of fact, and that is that finance public goods with public finance. Yeah? So if you have public goods, those are best done through public finance, but do not finance private goods through public finance, which in the slum upgrading programs, I think in Ray we have got things pretty wrong. We are doing things upside down. And I think the problems that we are seeing in Ray, in the Rajiv Awas Yojana, in the large housing programs, is because we are not following these basic rules. Now, in that, let me sort of take you to what is it that we are trying to do in the bank now, and why